Hi, my name is Ethan, and I will be the instructor for this video. In this tutorial, we will be making a word collage project. So we're going to get started. We're going to open up Xcode. We're going to create a new Xcode project. We want this one to be a single view application, iOS. You can call this whatever you'd like. I'm going to call mine Word Collage 3, just because I have a couple of these already. I'm going to push next. I'm going to say where I want it to be saved. I already have a folder made, so I will create this new project within this folder. Now we have our Xcode open. We can see on the left we have our navigator, in the center our navigator, and on the right our utilities. To get started, our word collage is just going to be a bunch of labels based around a subject. For mine, I wanted to make mine based off of world travels or word experiences that I have. So I'm going to look at my utilities under my objects library. I started searching for a label, so now I will click on that one. This is going to be my first label. I'm going to change this one to Mexico because I've visited Mexico. And if you look on the right, on our utilities, you notice that I am on the attributes inspector. There are a lot of neat features within each object that they all have to offer. And you notice that there's a lot that you can customize about it too. So right here, if I chose on color, I can choose a different color for my label font. Now it looks red. You could always customize it by clicking and then choosing a custom color of whichever you would prefer. And pay attention to this opacity right here, just because it's a concept that we're going to be using later, although not quite directly. But if you notice at 0 opacity, there is none of the color present. If you put full 100% opacity, our color is fully shown. So now I'm going to close that because I like that color. I can also change the font size or the font itself. Say I wanted to make mine a bit more fancy. I could make it a headline. And now this one will be done. We're not going to be directly editing our labels within the code, so I'm just going to add a couple more in here just so you can get the idea of what we'll be doing with it later. So the first one was Mexico. My second one, I will say USA. I'm going to change my color to blue. And since I live in the USA, I'm going to make this one a bit bigger. So I'm going to go to the size. And I'm going to make it bigger because I've spent more of my life here. And it's had a huge impact. Now I'm going to move on to the next one. And I will say Canada. Gonna make Canada a light blue because it was really cold when I went. I'm going to make it bigger. So on size, I'm going to click 30. You can see it updates. Some other features within the attributes is if you click on highlighted, you can add a highlight to your color. So I'm going to add a highlight. And now if we look closely, I can add our highlighted feature. So if you made it highlighted, it will choose this color. Once it became highlighted, but I'm not going to have it highlighted for now. You notice there's also a shadow feature. So now when we zoom in, it gives more of a 3D effect. Now if we scroll down, we can also see that we can add a background color to our text. So I'm going to add a darker color just so the name and our shadow really makes our word pop. Next thing I'm going to do, for now I am not going to edit the location of these. I'm going to leave them as is. Of course, I encourage you to add more labels to fill up your word collage and add constraints. But for the purpose of this tutorial, I will only be using these 3 labels. The next step that we're also going to be doing in this tutorial, we will be adding 3 buttons. And what we're going to want these buttons to do is to change the background color of our screen once we press it. So I'm going to say our first color to be red. The second color, I'm going to change it to be green. And our third color to be blue. I will space these out more later, but for our purposes, this will be good for now. Now I'm going to open up my assistant editor. That way I can see the source code and make the proper references to our buttons so that our code will perform action, or our buttons will perform an action when clicked. If you notice, I don't have too much room to work with here, and I don't really need the utilities or navigator for now. I'm going to minimize screen on the left. That way I can see more of our scene. This first scene is what the user will see right when they start the simulator. So we're going to make sure everything works appropriately right now, since we did not make any references yet. Our buttons should not perform any actions, but should not cause our app to crash. So to test this, to make sure our app is working incrementally, I chose my simulator, iPhone 6. You can choose any that you like to see it on. If you connected your device, you could be able to test your app on your phone if you have an iOS compatible device. I'm going to press play. And of course, this always takes a little bit the first time, so don't worry. Xcode has to open up and reload a whole simulator. And then it will open up the app. So here, in a few moments, we should expect to see a screen like this. I accidentally had it clicked. Our background color is still white because we have not changed it. So let's see if what we see is what we expected to see. So here our app is just loading. And as we can see, our 3 labels had come up on our phone or our simulator. And we have 3 clickable buttons that do not yet perform any action. So now I press Command H to minimize the simulator. Now I'm going to be going back to the code. And on the code, now we can continue and make our references. So to do that, you want to hold down the Control key and then click and drag the thing you're trying to reference. So if you notice, I did not click on the appropriate thing. It was not properly selected. So now I can see that only the button would be selected. So I can press Command, make an action, and say change background color to red. I'm going to add some space because we want to do the same thing for our other buttons. And you might be wondering, why is this considered an action? And the reason is that for each of these buttons, we want them to perform something when clicked. And so that's how we know that we want an action for our connection. If we wanted to change or manipulate data for the object, like in our previous tutorial, we changed the name of the label to say hello and the user's name. In that case, we want an outlet, but for here, we only want an action. So I'm going to name this one, change background color to green. And a different way, in case you're ever unsure about whether or not you have the correct thing selected, on our left, you can click on the object. Sorry, here I clicked on blue, which is the name of my button that I named blue. And you can hold down Control and click and drag a reference from the left as well. And it will do the same thing in making a connection. So this one will be called change background color to blue. Now, if we notice, I'm just going to add spacing here for now. Our whole scene is encased within a view object. And so our screen, or our scene, is selected when I click on our view object. And so for this view controller object, when we click on view, we can change the attribute or quality of its background color, but we have to reference this object. And don't worry if you are not too familiar with what objects are. This is more for later tutorials. When we get to it, it'll start to make more sense. So I don't want to reference the view object, which is just our background for all practicality of this tutorial, and I will say view. And if you notice, if we scroll down, we can see all the functions or qualities that our view object has. And I want the background color because we want to change your background color. And now I want to set it equal to a UI color. And for our first one, if I put a period, we can see the pre-made colors and or functions that UI color has to offer. So if I started typing in R, E, D, you notice that it comes up as a suggested. We can just press enter. And this stores all the values and calls all the values of what the pre-made color red is. So we don't have to make a custom color here. And I say this just because every pixel and every color on a phone is made by 3 colors, and that is red, green, and blue. Black is the absence of all colors, in which each pixel has a value for 0 on each value. And white is the collection of all these 3 colors. And so each value would be maxed out. So let's see this for now. I'm going to do view dot background color, and I'm going to set it equal to UI color. But instead of wanting to make or call a pre-made color, we're going to be making our own custom color. So when you make or you call the UI color function and you want to make your own color, you need to send it values for the red, green, blue, and alpha values. So red represents what values red will have. It's going to expect a value from 0 to 1. But a good way to think about it is it's some value over 255. Just because other languages tend to fill in these values from 0 to 255, 255 meaning that this pixel is maxed out on red if it had 255, and if it had a value of 0, then it will have none of this color. So we're going to be making our color green, so we don't want any red. So I'm going to say 0 out of 255. You could put in the decimal values. I am just putting this in as is for clarity. So we have a red variable. We have a value for a red variable. Now we're going to add a green value for a variable, and we want our background color to turn green. So I will be putting 255 out of 255. And now we want a value for our blue variable. And we don't want any of the blue for this one. So I will say 0 out of 255. And now we need the variable called alpha. And what is alpha? Alpha is similar to what we saw earlier when we saw the opacity. And it's really referencing how much of this color you want present. 0 being none, and 1 being fully present. So if I put the value of 1, we see now that our code is happy, and it is just saying that we want all the values shown fully for what we define them to be. Now for our blue, change background color to blue function, I will say view.background color. I'm going to save time on this one, but feel free to always play and test out your own personal colors by adding your own values and seeing what happens. And we're going to say UI color dot blue. So now when we run our app, when clicking on these buttons, it should change the background color to their associated name. Everything looks good so far, so I'm going to click on red, and you notice that our screen turns red. So Mexico looks like it disappeared, but it's just because our text is the same color as our background. So in cases like this, you might want to be careful to make sure that everything shows up nicely on your screen. If I put in green, it makes our background color green. Now we can see everything again. And if I put blue, USA is kind of faded. You can still kind of see it if you're careful. Don't worry if you can't. That is our app so far. I would like to encourage you to now pause this video, well, in a second after I explain the challenge, and I want you to try to make a reset action. So a button that when you press it turns the screen color back to white. So at this time, I encourage you to do that. And if you get stuck, do not worry. I will be going over it now. That way you have something to reference in case you get lost. But my challenge is to also have you try both ways using the UI color dot to see if there's a predefined color for white, and by adding your own red, green, blue, and alpha variables. So 2 ways to do this. First, we have to add a button, and I will be saying or naming this button reset. That way it's more descriptive in what it will be resetting, and it'll be resetting our screen color. Now I'm going to close the utilities because we don't need to change anything else or add anything else using the utilities. Now clicking on the reset button, I'm pressing Control and dragging it over to our code, and I'm going to call it an action. And within this action, I'm going to say change background color back to white. And I will press connect. So I will say view.background color equal to UI color dot, there is one that is white. This is one way to do it. Now I'm going to comment this one out by adding 2 forward slashes, and 2 forward slashes just tells the code not to worry about this line of code, but that us as a developer can see our own personal notes or comments. And now I will be writing the second way to do it by saying view that background color equal to UI color, and we'll be putting the parentheses so we can add our own red, green, and blue values. And as you may have guessed, white is a collection of colors, so we want all of our values maximized to the same amount: red, green, of course you could always just put 1, but it's always up to you. Feel free to do as you see fit. Instead of writing the fraction 255 over 255. So I have red, green, now I will be adding blue, which is 255 over 255. And now, as you may have guessed, we need a value for our last variable called alpha. Alpha will have a value of 1. So on line 26 right here, this will be considered solution 1, and 27 will be considered solution 2. So now if we press play, we can see what our app does. Everything looks good so far, so I'm going to test out our red, green, and blue still works. Now we will press reset. And we can see that it works fine. So I'm going to press Command H. And a lot of questions I have, of course I will talk about this more later, but I'm going to start mentioning it right now, is you may notice that there is an open squiggly bracket right here and closed squiggly bracket. A lot of times I will get students who will ask, how do we know where to add our functions or variables? And one way to think about it is if you notice this open and closed squiggly bracket, there must be a pair. So for when there's one opening bracket, there is one closing bracket, and each one must correspond to one of the others. So this is our class for our view controller, and this represents the code for our whole scene. So anything within these two brackets is anything we want to directly reference or call within this scene. And right here, we have two functions that we did not mess with that were predefined for us. Our view did load and did receive memory warning. I always try to put my functions that I make before this just for readability. And if we were to define variables or outlets, say I wanted an outlet right here, I would instantiate it at the top. And so I would say like USA label, just so I have my variables instantiated at the top together, and then the functions that I will be calling or making. That's one way you can think about it. And if we notice for this function that we have our action, there is a open and close bracket. This is for our change background color to red. So anything within these two brackets happens when this particular button is pushed. The same thing goes for all the other ones, but instead within their brackets. That's how you know if you wanted to add code, maybe you wanted your red button to do something else, you would add it between these two squiggly brackets, so you can add a new line before or after. Order does matter, just because in code, your code will execute what is first and then what is second. So it's something to be mindful of later, but we don't need to worry about it for this tutorial too much, as we are practically done, but we're not fully done yet. Another good thing to practice with this project is our constraints. So I'm going to close my assistant editor so I can see the screen better. Say I want my label that says Mexico. I want it to be in the top right corner, about where it is. So I'm going to make its top constraint official. So what this says is that Mexico to the object above it, the next object, and as there isn't any, it references the end or top of our screen. But that distance is 75 points. And if I do this on the left, this will be its 53 points. You want to make sure you always have a vertical and horizontal constraint. Otherwise, what you will get a warning for is ambiguity, in that you may have labeled or constrained it horizontally. Say I wanted it to be about this distance from the left, but I did not give it what distance to be from the right. Generally, this will cause like a runtime error, and that Mexico could be anywhere up and down on the screen. If you don't define it, typically they end up on the top left of our screen. So we can add these two constraints, and I leave the rest as a challenge for you so that you can practice making your own constraints. That is all for this tutorial, but you want the purpose to be that when you change your screen view, say like when I push play, I want to flip the screen horizontally. We want our app to look about the same. And if you notice, when I press Command and then my right arrow key, it flips the screen. Mexico looks about where it was in relation to everything else. But now we can't see anything else on our screen. So I leave this as a challenge to get everything that we have on this screen to be viewed when we flip our phone over to its side. That is all for this tutorial, and until next time, good luck.